Hey guys, thanks for visiting me again today, and we are going to be doing battle report number 2 for Dux Britanniarum. This is in June of 545 AD, the second battle, and coming up off of a Saxon loss, a British win. The Saxons are going to try and redeem themselves, get some loot. The warlord's really going to need it, especially if anything else goes wrong and makes the year go faster, because he will owe tribute to his king. And plus, he's trying to get enough clout, get enough warriors together to conquer some lands in Britain itself and make his own fiefdom, basically. So here we can see the layout of the tabletop. Can't really see the rise and the changes in elevation here, but there is two hills, one on the lower left and one on the upper right. The hills are underneath the battle mat this time. We'll see how that plays out. You can see two wooded areas, a road, and a stream going through the top of the hill there. Up in the upper left, you can see some three bushes going kind of diagonally on the corner of the map there, and you can see the Britons within those bushes. I don't have a fortification wall for the Dark Ages, so I'm going to be using bushes to represent where that wall is. It won't have any effect on the game. The Saxons can't attack it anyway, but let's go ahead and take a closer look. So as the title of this scenario goes, Wagon Train, the Saxons are attempting to raid a British wagon train on its way to a local province or fort. What you can see right now is only two wagons. There is a third getting ready to come on the board, but basically this scenario started off very similar to the cattle raid, with the British this time getting two free turns to move their forces onto the board. Now, the forces that are allotted in the book are one group of elite warriors, one group of levy, and two groups of regular warriors. And the three wagons, of course. So now in all the other scenarios, it specifies what groups or how many leaders you can take when deploying in such a manner, or any scenario. It tells you, exactly what forces you can bring and what leaders. This scenario, however, the side of the British who are escorting this wagon train, it doesn't say anything about leaders whatsoever. So at first, originally in these initial setup pictures, I did not deploy any leaders with them. In the end, before the battle started, I changed my mind and decided to give them one normal leader that is with the wagon train, and that turned out to be leader number 1, Junius. For the British, he will be escorting the wagon train, and then the British warlord and champion are in that fortification on the other side of the map, which we're going to look at right now. So here we can see on the opposite side of the table, this is where the Saxon wagon the British wagon train needs to get to. So like I said before, I don't have any fortification walls for the Dark Ages, so we're going to pretend that those three bushes right there are the perimeter of the fortification walls, which, like I said, also the Saxons cannot attempt to attack or raid anyway, so we don't really need the walls per se in this scenario. We just need to know where they're at. The Saxons, or I keep on saying the Saxons, the British will have two groups of levy and one group of missiles. That's their remaining force, as well as, not pictured as of yet, the British warlord and champion commanding these groups as well. Also, the British wagon train can also just go straight down the road and exit off the map if they wish, and the bush on the road will be signifying the far side border of the table, as well as the force morale dice setup, the gray being the British, the green being the Saxons. The green dice you can see is listed as a 4, whereas the British force morale is at a 5. That's because the Saxons lost the last raid, so their morale is already starting off -1 point at this point in time. And a quick shot lengthwise down the battlefield. You can see the British up there on the top, on the far end of the battlefield. That's where they're coming on at. And they will have to traverse this entire field and get over there, either exit off the road or get into the safety of the British fortifications. Next, we rolled for Saxon entrance, And as you can see here, they are going to be starting off just on the other side of the woods there, very close to the Saxon wagon train. That's going to be very, very beneficial for the Saxons. That's about as farthest they could be from the British support coming on from the fortification. So at this point, the British wagon train is pretty much isolated and cut off straight from the beginning. A little bit of redemption for the Saxons and the treatment that they got in their first raid. So I think this is already looking very good for the Saxons, and we'll see how it goes from here. But right here we're looking at a full overview of the battlefield. Before we start, you can see from left to right, the left being where the British need to go, the right where they're starting, and you can see the Saxon entry point down on the bottom of the map. So now that you've all been introduced, we can go ahead and get started. I forgot to take pictures of the players' starting hands. We did play some cards here. I think each side played maybe 2 to 3 cards each, but I'll go ahead and go into detail when that time comes. I'll tell you about what happened. So let's go ahead and get rocking. And turn 1, card number 1, British leader number 1, Junius, was drawn first. He's going to move 14 centimeters. He kind of crosses over a little bit across the road and approaching the deployment area of where the Saxons are going to be coming on. So you can see from here their facing has changed dramatically as opposed to where they were in the beginning. They were facing forward towards where they needed to go. Now their facing has changed more towards the Saxon edge, so they're pretty much in a march column formation at this point. That'll be important a little bit later on. Card number 2 drawn is the Saxon leader number 1, Afton, and he rolled 8 centimeters, barely enough to get himself on the board there with his group of elites. He has 12 elites plus himself. He's going to try and pretty much get along that road there and block any attempt of the wagon train to move across the board there. Card number 3 was Saxon leader number 2, Daigle, and he is going to move 13 centimeters, and he's going to come onto the board right away and start making his way back around the rear or side flank of the British wagon train there. You can see they're pretty much in marching column as well. That'll make it very easy for them once they go to move towards the Saxon or the British. All they're going to have to do pretty much is change their whole entire group facing. They're not going to have to wheel or anything like that. Card number 4 was the British Lord Decimus, and he moves 13 centimeters directly out from the Roman walls. He is going to go as fast as he can pretty much to get over towards that wagon train. That's about all he can do at this point, is try and get over there. Card number 5 is the British Missiles. They didn't roll a very good move, 7 centimeters, so they got just enough pretty much to get outside of the walls. They're going to tail along there with the British warlord Decimus and see if they can get up there with haste and affect this outcome of the battle. Card number 6 is the Saxon Lord Senhelm, and he rolled a huge 16 centimeter move there, so that got him onto the table, well onto the table, and into the woods. So he is pretty close to striking distance already within that wagon train here. Let's see how quickly he can get through those woods. And now that all of the cards have been drawn, the Saxons do have one group left to come onto the table. I do believe I forgot to mention that in the beginning the Saxons rolled on their table edge for entry. Also afterwards they had to roll for how many groups would be entering the board. They did roll a 5, which is pretty much their entire army minus one group, so they chose to bring on all their melee groups first, and their missile group would be bringing up their rear. So next turn, on turn 2, we'll add that missile card into the group, and he will be taking part in the battle as well. Then we'll have all the cards in the deck at that time. So now that we've drawn all the command cards, now we do the uncommanded groups, whatever groups do not have a commander attached to them, and that will be, or whatever groups have not been activated by any commander that turn. And the groups that have not been acted by a commander are the small group of levy, as well as the elites down there below the levy. So they both simply do a wheel to face the oncoming Saxons, both the small group of warriors led by Saxon leader to Dagal, as well as the Saxon elites coming through those woods there right in front of them. So that's pretty much all they did. The last uncommanded group, of course, is the Wagon train, and they rolled 11 centimeters on 2d6, which is a pretty darn good move. That got them well up the road and plenty enough room to bring that third wagon onto the road as well. So now you can see all three wagons there as well. And that is going to be the conclusion of turn number 1. And as always, here's a quick overview of the battlefield at the end of turn number 1. You can see down at the bottom where the Saxons have come on the board. Right above them on the other side of the woods, the Saxons adjusting and trying to get into position to defend that wagon train. And way over in the top left, you can see the Saxon warlord, his levy, and the archers trying to get down around that stream and bend the corner, get up that road as quickly as possible to help defend that wagon train. And at the start of turn number 2, the first card drawn is the British missiles, and they simply move 8 centimeters forward. Another slow move from them gets them up flush with the British warlord there. They're going to, once again, try and get over there as quickly as possible. Card number 2 was Saxon leader number 1, Afton, who rolled a dismal 6 centimeters on their move, stumbling along forward. We'll see if he can make it over there to the road in time to block off that wagon train. Card number 3 was the British Lord Decimus, who rolled 15 centimeters for his move and got up there on the road. So they're in pretty good position to assist their brethren up above them as long as they can continue rolling good. He will have to contend with Afton and his elite warriors right there in the top right corner of the screen, getting ready to march into his path. So we'll see what happens with that conflict. And I guess it was bound to happen. Unfortunately, I misplaced a couple of photos, and especially unfortunate because it was really a combat that I wanted to show you guys. But anyway, so the card number 4, Saxon Lord Senhelm, pictured here in the center. I'm going to use the last moves that these two groups made just so it's a refresher and you can understand what I'm talking about here. So Senhelm, the warlord who marched his 2 groups of warriors into the woods there last turn, he charged this group of British warriors. I believe that's who it is. Yeah, the British warriors there with the commander Junius right on the other side of the woods. The group basically forming the vanguard of that wagon train. And if you remember, I was speaking about how their facing had changed due to the direction of their move, and they were basically in marching column. So what you see right there is Junius. Basically, the Saxons came through the woods and hit them straight where Junius, the leader, is standing right there in the lower right of that unit. Which would have been a flank attack if they were not facing that way, number 1, and number 2, if they would have had a Carpe Diem card that would have allowed a flank attack. But since they were facing lengthwise of that direction, basically in marching column going towards the bottom right corner of the screen, the Saxons charged directly into the head of their marching column, which left the Saxons with quite a large advantage. The Brits only had 4 fighting plus their leader, which came out to be 6 attacks. The Saxons had 10 attacks, plus they played the card aggressive charge, which was +1 to hit. Saxons hit 8 times. They had 4 kills and 2 shock. They did not roll a leader hit. The British rolled 3 times. They had 4 attacks. They hit 3 times. They had 1 kill and 1 shock. The result of that combat was a Saxon win by +3. The British withdrew 6 centimeters and their formation was broken. They took it pretty hard there. Unfortunately, I don't have the pictures. They fell back almost all the way to the other side of the road there. And as well as I don't have the remaining pictures of turn 2, unfortunately. But the next card number 5, immediately after, was British leader number 1, Junius, who just got pushed back and withdrew. By the way, the Saxons were unable to maintain contact. The British withdrew so far. So anyway, Junius was the next up, card number 5. He just commanded his broke formation back into the two groups back into formation pretty much, and that's all he could do because it took one command to move one group in contact with the other and a second command to turn them back into a group. So he was all out of commands at that point. But at that point in time, they were facing parallel to the road, so they now had a wide front towards the Saxons. Unfortunately, like I said, I don't have pictures of that. Card number 6 was the Saxon leader number 2, Dagol, who moved 13 centimeters towards the group of elites and levy at the rear of the wagon train. And then card number 7 was the Saxon missiles, who moved a large number, 17 centimeters, and they got pretty much flush up alongside Afton to support him, basically right at the base of the hill. On the other side of the hill, if that hill wasn't there, they'd be able to shoot at the British warlord. After that, the uncommanded groups, we had 1 levy and elites over there by the rear of the wagon train. They held their position, and the wagon train itself moved only 7 centimeters along the road there. So that's it, and now we can go get back into some actual pictures that show what events are actually taking place. Okay, so we're back in business with the pictures here. Sorry about that once again, guys. I will really try and focus and not let any of those mishaps happen. We want as few of those as possible, obviously. Anyway, turn number 3, card number 1, was the Saxon leader Afton here in the center, and he rolled 13 centimeters. He wheeled 5 centimeters and then moved up alongside the archers. Basically, he's preparing to face off with the British warlord approaching from off screen to the left. But you can see here at the top of this picture, you can see the British in front of that wagon train there. That's how they fall back to. The Junius withdrew that far onto the road and reformed his 2 groups there. And that's where they're sitting at now. Just below them on the other side, on the far right corner, upper right corner of the screen, you can see the Saxons, the Saxon warlord and his champion coming out of the woods with the Saxon warriors. That's where they made contact with that marching column of British. So that kind of gives you a good idea of what happened in that last turn of combat. So let's see what happens next. Card number 2 was the British Lord Decimus, who moved 12 centimeters, and once he moved into that position, as you see there, he used another activation to form his groups into a shield wall. So those 2 levy groups are now in a shield wall. There's a big problem there because Afton is commanding the elites. So this is going to be a lopsided showdown, I believe, with Afton and his elites versus the warlord, British warlord, and his levy soldiers, which are 2 classes below. I don't think this is going to go very pretty for the British there. The next card, card number 3, was the Saxon missiles. As you can see here, they did not have to move. That's already the position they were in. So they went ahead and they shot at the British levy. So they were going to need 4+ to hit with 4 shots. They rolled 3 hits, but only caused 1 shock on the levy. So one of those levy groups got 1 shock, but that's it. That's the extent of the damage they did. Card number 4 was the Saxon leader number 2, Dagol, and he decided to command and charge his 1 small group of Saxon warriors towards those elites there. So he did make contact with a 15-centimeter roll, and so we will go into the first round. The Saxons played aggressive charge. They had 2 aggressive charge cards in their hand from the beginning, which will give them a +1 to hit. The British played strong arm, which they can throw missiles basically, and we'll resolve that strong arm card first. The British got 6 throws because they had 6 people in that unit. The levy are not in formation with them. As you can see, they're kind of offset there in supporting positions. But out of those 6 throws, they only managed to cause 1 shock on the Saxon warriors, but that may make a difference. So to the combat, the Saxons had 8 attacks. They scored 5 hits, 1 shock, and 2 kills. The British are not in shield wall, so those 2 kills will stand. There was no leader wound roll made because there was no leader in that British group. The British had 2 attacking groups. They had the elites, which were providing 6 attacks, and they scored 1 hit and 1 shock. And then those levy next to them, because they are within 2 centimeters, they get to support and join the fight. They were able to provide 4 attacks, and let's see, this picture kind of shows a little better after they formed contact here, I think. Yeah, that does. So they were able to provide 4 attacks. They scored 4 hits out of those 4 attacks, but they only caused 2 shock on the Saxon warriors. So the Saxons ended up winning this combat by +2. The Brits had no excess shock, so the Brits were pushed back 1 centimeter, and the Saxons managed to maintain contact with them. So we went into combat round number 2, where the Saxons had 8 attacks. They scored 6 hits. 3 went to the levy, 3 went to the elites. They caused 1 shock to the elite and 1 shock to the levy, and that's it. So that was kind of disappointing for the Saxons in round 2 of combat. The British had 9 total attacks. They scored 6 hits, 1 kill, and 1 shot. So the British won the second round by +1. No excess shock. The Saxons hold where they're at, and that is the end of that combat. Card number 5 of turn 3 is the British missiles, and they rolled 12 centimeters on their move. They got basically right up alongside that stream edge there, and that's it. They didn't have any clear shots, unfortunately, so they are going to have to maneuver a little bit more before they can take part in this battle. And card number 6 was the Saxon Lord Senhelm, who once again charged Junius, the vanguard of that wagon train. Only rolled 7 centimeters, which was not good enough to make contact, so that charge fell short. Which the very next card, card number 7, was British leader number 1, Junius, who is that British vanguard, pictured right there, right in just short of the Saxon charge. And he gave the command to rally 1 point of shock off of one of those groups, and then he formed a shield wall, formed those 2 groups back into a shield wall. Which I guess not back into a shield wall, because they were never in a shield wall to begin with. So at least now they have somewhat of a defensive position set to defend that wagon train, which you can see kind of snaking around the back. Yeah, so they'll probably be back into contact again next turn. And now we can go into the uncommanded groups, which are the British elites and levy, who are in an ongoing combat here. So we are going to perform 2 more rounds of combat. And the first round, the British will get 9 attacks. They scored 5 hits. They got 1 kill and 1 shock on the Saxons. The Saxons had 7 attacks. They scored 5 hits. 3 hits went to the elites. They caused 2 shock. 2 hits went to the levy. They caused 2 shock. So once again, that's 2 combat rounds in a row that the Saxons have failed to get any kills. If you remember Dagal and the first battle, the cattle raid, the Afton, the leader number 1 or the leader number 2 for the Saxons, and this same 6 group of Saxon warriors had fought the British elites in the first battle, although the elites did have the British warlord and champion with them at the time. But Dagol and his group got absolutely mopped up on top of that hill in the first battle, so he's really trying to redeem himself here in this raid. Anyway, the Brits managed to win this combat by +1. The Saxons had excess shock, so they withdrew 2 centimeters, and the British pursued and maintained contact, so it went into a round number 2. The British had 9 attacks. They scored 4 hits, 1 kill, 1 shock. The Saxons had 6 attacks. They scored 4 hits. They caused 2 kills on the levy and 2 more shock on the elites. So the Saxons won a second round with +1. Both sides had excess shock, and as you can see here, both sides ended up withdrawing. So I don't know what is going to be the outcome here. The Saxons at this time, they do have a card which is rally. Dagol could use the rally to remove a good portion of that shock, hopefully, that's on him. You can see here they have 7 points of shock. There's now 4 models in that group, including Dagol himself, so he's going to have to rally at least 3 off there to be any sort of combat efficient in this game. So you can see over on the right, the British there, they have been dwindled down. The elites have lost a total of 2 men. The levy have lost a total of 2 men. So the rear of that wagon train is looking pretty sketchy there. But I don't know if the Saxons just have the manpower or not to capitalize on that. Regardless, I don't think it matters, because right above those British groups you can see just a hint of the Saxon warlord and his 2 groups of warriors, which I think are getting ready to go onto a rampage. Let's find out. And finally, the last move of this turn is going to be the British wagon train, and they rolled 2d6. They ended up with a 4 centimeter move. Must be because they're trying to go off-road and sneak around the rear of the British defenses there. But yeah, they didn't roll very good on that move. Barely creeping along there. They're going to have to do better than that, especially with how quickly the Saxons are coming on. You can see here the overall outlook of the battle after at the end of turn 3. And yeah, you can see over there on the right side where the 2 opposing forces backed off from one another. In the center there, the Saxon warlord is getting ready to continue his attacks on that British vanguard. And over on the left, you can see where the British warlord and his levy are getting ready to make contact with the Saxon leader Afton and his elite troops. And yeah, that's about it. The missile troops have been pretty much no effect in this game as of this far. Okay, card number 1 of the 4th turn is British leader number 1, Junius, who is that vanguard right there with that group. And I took this picture before I had rallied on the last turn there with him and removed 1 point of shock. But what I did with him is he simply jumped sides of the formation, went over to the other side. Basically, he's shown here on the left. He moved over to the right side in contact with the other group of British warriors, and he rallied that point of shock from off there. So this group of British now have 0 shock for the whole formation, and they are in shield wall ready to brace against the Saxons. So I think they're in a pretty good position. You know, given the circumstances here, I don't think they're going to be able to fight them off, but they're in about as best position as they could hope to be in at this point in time. So we'll see what happens there. And card number 2 is Saxon leader number 1, which is Afton, and he plays the card Audacia, which is going to increase his status to 3 for this entire turn. So he's going to go from a status 2 leader to a status 3 leader, which will give him +3 3 attacks in combat as opposed to his normal 2. He gives the charge command, and they were pretty close. He did end up making contact. I think he rolled a 14 centimeters, which was easy enough to get into contact here. So we went into combat round number 1. The Saxons had a total of 15 attacks. They scored 9 hits. They got 5 kills and 3 shock. So they hit, out of 5 kills, remember the British were in a shield wall, so that 5 kills is taken down to 4 kills. So they caused 4 kills actually and 3 shock. Leader injury rolled a 6, which was no injuries whatsoever on the leader. The British, they had 17 attacks. They scored 8 hits. They had 1 kill and 4 shock. The Saxons won this combat with a +3. The British were pushed back, and their shield wall was broken, and the Saxons managed to maintain contact. So the second round of combat, the Saxons had 14 attacks. They had 7 hits, 3 kills, and 2 shock, no leader wounds. And the British had 13 attacks. They had 8 hits, they had 1 kill, and 3 shocks. So the Saxons won this combat as well by +2, and the Brits withdraw, and both groups are at the shock limit for both of their groups. They're not excess shock, but they are borderline right there. Yeah, and so we'll go ahead and draw the next card here. So card number 3 is the Saxon Lord Senhelm, and he charges that vanguard once again. He rolled 8 centimeters, which was plenty enough to make contact, and it will go into the first round of combat. The Saxons had 16 attacks. They hit 11 times. They had 5 kills and -1 because of the shield wall, so they ended up totaling 4 kills and 3 shock. Once again, no leader injury there. The British had 10 attacks. They scored 5 hits. They had 2 kills and 3 shock, which is pretty good for the 5 hits. Each one of those hits did something. So the Saxons still ended up winning by +2. The British withdrew. And yeah, so it's not going pretty good for the British at this point in time. The Brits withdrew so far. The Saxons could not remain in contact. So that's going to be the end of that combat. Card number 4 was Saxon leader number 2, Dagol, and he plays the card Rally. He removed 4 shock from his group, so that group is now good to go. And then he advanced a total of 10 centimeters towards the British lines there. Now, he does have a little bit of an advantage here because the elites and the levy, as you can see there, that he's approaching are now separated by greater than 2 centimeters. So he could charge one of those groups and the other are not going to be within range to support the combat. So he might be able to wipe those levy out here depending on what happens. The British will still get to command their uncommanded groups at the end of this turn, but even then, excuse me, he will only be able to charge one of those groups in at a time, so it'll still be a one-on-one combat, basically. I think if the elites charge in there, I don't know. It's pretty much a draw down there at this point in time. It's very close for both sides. Card number 5 was the British Lord, and he rallied twice on that formation there, removing 2 shock, trying to get them back up into combat readiness again. I don't know how well that's going to go, but the next card you can see was the British missiles, and they moved 7 centimeters again, which was just enough to get them all. They only rolled 2d6, by the way, because they were crossing that stream, so they got just to the side of the British levy there with enough space to take some shots at those Saxon elites. They shot at the Saxon elites. They needed +5s or 5+ to hit because they moved. They had 2 hits out of their 4, even with that stringent requirement, but still they had no effect. So those missiles didn't do any good whatsoever. Card number 7 was the Saxon missiles, who moved 13 centimeters, and then they shot at Decimus there and his group because they were up on the hill and had pretty good visibility, as you can see there. They had 4 shots. They needed 5+ to hit. They scored 1 hit and caused 1 shock on the levy over there. So a little bit of effectiveness from the Saxon missiles. And finally, towards the end of turn number 4, it will be the uncommanded and unactivated units left. All the British units hold in place, no orders are given, and the wagon train rolled 4 centimeters again. So you can see here barely has moved whatsoever since those first couple turns. The Brits have a tough choice here, and they are going to choose to voluntarily withdraw from this battlefield. And there are several reasons for that. The first and foremost is they are taking heavy losses and causing minimal losses to the Saxons. And they're pretty sure that the Saxons are going to get away with this wagon train in the end. So they're going to let them take the wagon train. They believe that if this combat continues, it's going to be pretty nasty. They're probably going to end up losing Junius, who's down there facing off against the Saxon warlord, and they may lose their champion or even their warlord himself. That's the way this raid is going so far. I mean, it's going heavily in favor of the Saxons. As you can see here, the overall outlook at the end of turn 4, there's just not much that the British can throw back at the Saxons here. I mean, they have nothing. Their groups are depleted. Their best outlook is over on the far right, which is well behind where the wagon train is, where their group of 4 elite and 4 levy are still facing off against Dagal. But even that is a push there. Depending on the way the dice roll, it could go either way. So the British could end up losing their elites as well and get even further into the victory deficit. So, and that's another thing, is that the British have lost so many troops at this point, and the Saxons have lost so little, that the Saxons are going to be able to raid over this next couple months. It's only June, and there's at least 4 months left in the campaign season. And if the British take heavy losses, they're going to be replenishing their losses for 3 months. That's going to give the Saxons 3 months to perform raids uncontested, and that's going to be a lot of wealth that the Saxons are going to get. He's probably going to be able, if that was the case, he'd probably be able to get enough clout, enough support to start an actual battle somewhere along the Saxon shore and claim his own land. Once he claims his own land and gets a foothold, he's going to be able to, improve that land, build fortifications to defend it, recruit more followers, and overall it's going to start that steamroll effect of the Saxon victories, and the British want to avoid it at all costs. So they're going to withdraw, give the Saxons this wagon train, and hopefully be able to recover their lost forces within a month or maybe 2 months tops, and get back on the defense as quickly as possible. So we'll have to see how it goes and add up the stats here. Give me just one moment. So how are we looking after the second scenario of our Ducks campaign? Well, the Saxons win raid number 2, the wagon train, and they won by these points. So the British, they lost 19 men, which was -3. The British lost 9 levy, which was another -1 point, and they only killed 8 Saxons, which was +1 point. That's a total of a -3 victory margin there, basically. The Saxons, they won the raid, so they get +2 points for that. They only lost 8 men, so they only lost -1 point for that. And they killed 19 British, so they got +3 points for that. So they got a total of +4 on their victory margin. +4 to -3 is a +7 difference in favor of the Saxons. That is a huge difference. That's the maximum difference that you can get, or at least the maximum that the book makes accommodations for. So the Saxons, they replenish their losses immediately. Once they leave the battlefield, they already got followers there joining up their great victory, basically. More than likely not, probably by the time they get back to their camp. their scouts or whatever have spread the good news ahead, and there's already people ready to sign up. So they are ready to go the very next month in July to start raiding. They also, since it was +7, they get one group of reinforcements, so they got to roll on the reinforcement chart, and it came out to be 6 warriors. So the British or the Saxon army has gotten even bigger. They now get an additional 6 warriors to field on the tabletop, which I will have to paint up or find some suitable replacements. I don't have any more splintered light warriors, but I do have plenty of other Dark Age warriors somewhere around here that I could use for suitable replacements, more than likely. So yeah, they're going to get another group of warriors out on the tabletop, which is bad news for the British, because yeah, it's not going too good for them after here. The Saxons do not gain any wealth from that victory, which is strange, but I think that's more of a balancing issue because the Saxons won so big, they got their instant replenishment, so they're ready to go next month. Plus, they have an even bigger army now, so they're going to be able to raid, this next 2 or 3 months uncontested, and they're going to get wealth from that instantly. So the Saxons still are at a beggar's bowl at their wealth level, which is a 1 out of 10, and the British have a patrician's purse, which is a 4 out of 10. So the British do have a little bit more money, but yeah, they're currently without an army for the most part. They could field, a shortened, beat down army, which they have, but that'll be a bad idea, especially since the Saxons are getting an additional unit of warriors to field as well. That would be even more heavily outnumbered, and it would just snowball from there, and I think the campaign would probably be over by the end of the year, if not in the middle of next year. So yeah, that's where we're at. The Saxons are going to have at least 2 months of free raiding, if not 3. I got to crunch the numbers there and see the exact amount. I'll let you know in the next battle report exactly what turns out from the Saxons' free raids there. I know they're going to get some money, that's for sure. Anyway, guys, hope you enjoyed this battle report. Once again, let me know what you think. I apologize about misplacing those couple pictures there in the beginning. Kind of killed it for me, I think. I'm pretty disappointed in myself for that, especially since I wanted to show you that specific combat, the charge into the marching column. Anyway, guys, take care, stay safe, and tomorrow's Christmas. Merry Christmas, guys. Take it easy.